Welcome back to Space Universe. Today we are not talking about space. Today we are talking about a man whose story is so extraordinary that if it were written as fiction nobody would believe it. A man who was born into danger, fled across the world as a baby, lost nearly everything multiple times, spent 20 years being rejected and ignored, and then at the age of 39 became the most beloved actor on the planet. This is the true and complete story of Pedro Pascal. And I promise you by the end of this video you will never look at him the same way again. To understand Pedro Pascal you first need to understand the country he was born into. Santiago is the capital city of Chile. It sits in a long narrow country on the western edge of South America, pressed between the Andes Mountains on the east and the Pacific Ocean on the west. Chile is one of the most geographically dramatic countries on Earth. In the north you have the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on the entire planet. In the south you have Patagonia, a vast wilderness of glacier fjords and forests that stretches toward Antarctica. And in the center you have Santiago, a modern city of over 7 million people surrounded by mountains on almost every side. Pedro Pascal was born in Santiago on April 2, 1975. His full name at birth was José Pedro Balmaceda Pascal. His mother Veronica Pascal Ureta was a child psychologist. His father José Balmaceda Riera was a fertility doctor. By every measure they were an educated professional family living in one of the most beautiful cities in South America. But the world Pedro was born into was not a safe one. 2 years before Pedro was born, in September 1973, a military general named Augusto Pinochet had launched a violent coup against the democratically elected president of Chile, Salvador Allende. Allende died on the day of the coup. Pinochet took power and within days Chile became a military dictatorship. What followed over the next 17 years was one of the darkest chapters in the history of South America. Pinochet's secret police, known as the DINA, operated a system of surveillance, arrest, torture and murder, targeting anyone considered a threat to the regime. More than 3,000 people were killed or forcibly disappeared. Over 40,000 people were imprisoned and tortured. An entire generation of Chilean intellectuals, doctors, teachers, lawyers, and ordinary people who had simply supported the wrong political party lived in constant fear. Pedro's parents were not revolutionaries. He has described them publicly as young liberal college students. But in Pinochet's Chile, even being young and liberal was enough to put you on a list. What made the situation immediately dangerous for Pedro's family was their connection to the opposition. Pedro's mother was related to Andrés Pascal Allende, the nephew of the former president Salvador Allende himself. After the coup, the family sheltered Andrés as he tried to avoid capture by the regime. This act of protection placed Pedro's parents directly in the crosshairs of Pinochet's secret police. Pedro's father José was a doctor. When a man arrived at his door wounded from a gunshot, José treated him. That man, under torture by the DINA, later revealed José's name to the regime. From that moment Pedro's parents became enemies of the state. They had to disappear immediately. Pedro was 6 months old. His parents went into hiding and left baby Pedro in the care of his aunt. For 6 months his parents hid inside Santiago while the secret police searched for them. 6 months of not knowing if they would survive. 6 months of separation from their infant son. Finally they made their move. They climbed the walls of the Venezuelan embassy in Santiago and demanded political asylum. The family was eventually reunited. The International Red Cross helped arrange for them to leave Chile without their passports being stamped in a way that would mark them permanently as exiles, which would have made returning to Chile in the future extremely difficult. They flew out of Santiago. Pedro was 9 months old. He would not set foot in Chile again as a resident for many years. The family's first destination was Denmark. Specifically the city of Aarhus on the Jutland Peninsula on the western coast of Denmark. It is a port city of around 300,000 people, known for its university's cultural life and its cold grey North Sea winters. The contrast between the Andean landscape of Santiago and the flat coastal plains of Denmark could not have been more stark. For a family of Chilean refugees who had just barely escaped a military dictatorship, the quietness of Danish life must have felt surreal. They spent roughly a year there while Pedro's father José secured funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, which would allow him to continue his medical studies in the United States. From Denmark the family crossed the Atlantic and landed in Texas. San Antonio, a city of around 1 million people in the south-central part of Texas sitting on the edge of the hill country about 80 miles southwest of Austin. San Antonio has a deep Hispanic cultural heritage. The famous Alamo is there. Spanish is spoken everywhere. For a young Chilean family it was perhaps the most welcoming American city they could have landed in. Pedro's father continued his medical career there. His mother Veronica pursued a PhD in child psychology. The family built a new life in Texas and Pedro and his older sister Javiera began growing up as American children who also happened to speak Spanish and carry the memory of a home country they had barely known. Pedro has described his childhood in San Antonio warmly. His father took the family to the movies 2 or 3 times a week. Pedro fell so deeply in love with Indiana Jones that he broke his arm not once but twice pretending to be the character. He became a competitive swimmer. He made friends. He went to public school. He was the son of Chilean immigrants in a Texas city that understood what it meant to be between 2 cultures. By the time he was 8 years old his family had begun regularly visiting Chile again to see their enormous extended family. Pedro has described having 34 first cousins who remain close to him to this day and who are part of a family group chat called Sinvergenzas, which roughly translates to scoundrels. When Pedro was 11 years old the family relocated from San Antonio to Orange County in Southern California. This move hit Pedro hard. He has described those early years in California as really rough because of bullying at school. The move away from everything familiar, the difficulty of fitting in and the experience of being perceived as an outsider again shaped him in ways he has spoken about publicly. But it was also in California where something important happened. Pedro discovered acting. He enrolled in the Orange County School of the Arts in Santa Ana and for the first time found a place where he truly belonged. After completing high school Pedro moved across the country to New York City. He enrolled at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, one of the most prestigious acting programs in the United States. He graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in 1997. He was 22 years old. He was trained. He was ready. And what followed was not a rapid rise to fame. What followed was 20 years of struggle that most people in his position would not have survived. After graduating from NYU, Pedro stayed in New York and began the life of a working actor in the most expensive city in America. For most of those years that meant waiting tables and bartending. He worked at a restaurant called Ruby Foos on Broadway. He worked at a place called Flamingo East on 2nd Avenue. He was fired from bartending at a venue in the West Village. He worked at Cafe Habana in the Nolita neighborhood of Manhattan. Table to table year after year while going to auditions and being told no. His close friend actress Sarah Paulson, who would later become famous herself, was so aware of how little money Pedro had that she would sometimes give him her per diem money simply so he could afford to eat. The roles he did get were small. A guest appearance on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Minor characters on Law and Order, which he appeared on 4 different times playing 4 different characters across different episodes. Small parts on shows like NYPD Blue, The Good Wife, Nurse Jackie and Homeland. He was working consistently enough to stay in the industry but not consistently enough to sustain a real career without the restaurant work. He has described a moment where he had less than $7 in his bank account. For a man who had graduated from one of the top acting schools in the country and had spent years honing his craft, that was a particular kind of difficult to carry. And then in 1995, while Pedro was still a young man in New York, the family situation became complicated again. His father Jose, who had built a successful fertility clinic at the University of California, Irvine, became embroiled in a major scandal. He and 2 other doctors at the clinic were accused of taking eggs and embryos from patients without their knowledge and implanting them in other women. The scandal made national news. The clinic shut down. His father fled to Chile with his wife and Pedro's 2 youngest siblings to avoid prosecution in the United States. The safe nest Pedro had known in California was suddenly gone. The family home he had always assumed he could return to no longer existed. He described this period as a time of great fear, saying that one day to the next there was no longer a home to return to. His parents separated after returning to Chile. And then in 1999, when Pedro was 24 years old and still a struggling actor in New York, his mother Veronica Pascal, the woman he has described as the love of his life, died by suicide. He has spoken about her death publicly on several occasions and has said that it was the hardest time of his life. That he has never been able to fully reconcile the circumstances of her death. In her memory, he made a decision. He stopped using his father's surname Balmaceda professionally and began using his mother's surname Pascal. Every role he has performed under the name Pedro Pascal is a tribute to her. He carries her name every single time he appears on screen. In 2011, things looked like they might change. He was cast in an NBC pilot for a Wonder Woman television series. If the show had been picked up, it could have changed everything. The pilot was not picked up. He was 36 years old and had been in the industry for nearly 20 years with nothing to show for it in terms of mainstream recognition. Around this same time, he has said that he had given himself a personal deadline. If he had not achieved major exposure by the time he was 29 years old, he told himself it was over. He had long since passed that deadline and kept adjusting it. Kept finding reasons to stay. The reason that finally mattered arrived in 2014. He was 38 years old. The showrunners of Game of Thrones, the most watched television series on the planet at that time, were casting for a character named Oberyn Martell. A prince from a region called Dawn. Charming, dangerous, sophisticated and deeply motivated by grief and revenge. Pedro Pascal auditioned and got the role. He appeared in only 7 episodes of the show's 4th season. But the impact of his performance was so enormous, so immediate and so emotionally resonant that the internet effectively erupted around it. Fans who watched his character meet a particularly brutal end described the moment as traumatic. Millions of viewers who had never heard of Pedro Pascal before that season became devoted fans overnight. The Game of Thrones role led directly to Narcos, the Netflix crime drama following the rise and fall of Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar. Pedro played real-life DEA agent Javier Pina. The show ran from 2015 to 2017 and deepened his reputation as an actor capable of carrying a major production. Then came what he has called a whole other level. Jon Favreau, the creator of The Mandalorian, the first live-action Star Wars television series, cast Pedro as Din Djarin, a bounty hunter navigating the outer reaches of the galaxy after the fall of the Empire. The show launched on Disney Plus in November 2019 and became one of the most watched streaming series in the world. The character wore a helmet for almost the entire series, meaning that Pedro conveyed everything through body language and voice alone. It was a masterclass in physical acting and it made him a global superstar. And then came The Last of Us. The HBO adaptation of the critically acclaimed video game launched in January 2023. Pedro played Joel Miller, a hardened survivor in a post-apocalyptic America tasked with smuggling a teenage girl named Ellie across a devastated country. The show was an immediate phenomenon. It became one of the most watched HBO series in history. Pedro's performance earned him a SAG award and a historic Emmy nomination, making him only the second Latino actor ever to be nominated for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series. He made history as the Latino actor with the most Emmy nominations in a single year. At the age of 48, Pedro Pascal is today considered one of the most beloved and in-demand actors on the planet. He starred in Gladiator 2 in 2024. He played Reed Richards in the Marvel Cinematic Universe film The Fantastic Four: First Steps in 2025. He continues to be the face of The Mandalorian. And wherever he goes, he carries with him the full weight of everything that made him. A country he was forced to flee as an infant. A mother whose name he carries in her honor. 20 years of rejection and restaurant shifts and $7 in a bank account. 34 cousins in a group chat called Scoundrels. And a story that proves beyond any doubt that it is never too late, and the distance between where you start and where you arrive can be greater than the distance between continents. If this video gave you something today, then hit the like button right now. Subscribe to Space Universe, because every week we bring you the real stories behind the people, places and events that shaped our world. I will see you in the next one.